Welcome, listeners, to a story whispered on the wind and carved into the very bones of the earth. This is a tale from a time long past, a time of gods and giants, of heroes and monsters. You may have heard it called by another name, a name that thunders with the promise of a final, terrible battle. Tonight, we begin the telling of Ragnarok, the Twilight of the gods. But we will not journey to the icy fjords of the north. Instead, our story unfolds in a land of sprawling forests and towering mountains, a place that feels both ancient and strangely familiar. Our tale begins not with a bang, but with a tremor, a deep, unsettling shudder that ran through the 9 realms. It was a sign, a portent of what was to come. In the highest realm, a city of shimmering gold and silver called Asgard, the gods lived in blissful ignorance. Their leader was the Allfather, a wise and powerful king named Odin. Odin was a god of many contradictions. He was a seeker of knowledge, a master of magic, and a fearsome warrior. He had sacrificed one of his eyes for a drink from the well of wisdom, and what he saw in those waters both enlightened and haunted him. He saw the threads of fate, the intricate tapestry of lives and deaths, and he saw the final, bloody thread that marked the end of his own world. But Odin was not a god to surrender to despair. He was a strategist, a planner. He spent his days preparing for the inevitable. He gathered the souls of the bravest mortal warriors, the Einherjar, to his great hall, Valhalla. There, they feasted and fought, honing their skills for the day they would be called to fight alongside the gods. He sent his raven messengers, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, across the realms to bring him news of any impending threats. He was a king preparing his kingdom for a war he knew he could not win. One of his most trusted advisors was a man of humble origins who had risen through the ranks to become a respected general. His name was William, and he was known for his unwavering loyalty and his keen understanding of battle. William had seen firsthand the growing unease in the realms. He had heard the whispers of dissent among the giants, the ancient enemies of the gods. He had seen the strange, unnatural weather patterns that plagued the mortal world, a world the gods called Midgard. He had brought his concerns to Odin, but the Allfather's response was always the same, a grim nod and a heavy silence. Odin's wife, the beautiful and wise Queen Frigg, shared his burden. She was a seeress, a woman who could glimpse the future, and what she saw filled her with a mother's dread. She saw the death of her beloved son, Baldur, a god so pure and so loved that all of creation had sworn an oath never to harm him. All, that is, except for one small, insignificant plant, the mistletoe. Frigg knew this, and the knowledge was a constant, gnawing pain in her heart. Their other son, Thor, the god of thunder, was a stark contrast to his father. Thor was a force of nature, a warrior of immense strength and a heart as big as his hammer, Mjolnir. He was the protector of Midgard, the champion of humanity. He was a simple god, driven by a fierce loyalty to his family and a deep-seated hatred for the giants. He was often away from Asgard, his chariot pulled by 2 great goats, Krakr and Nasha, his hammer whistling through the air as he battled the monstrous forces that threatened to encroach upon the mortal realm. He was unaware of the intricate web of fate that was slowly closing in on them all. He saw the world in black and white, good and evil, gods and giants. He did not understand the shades of gray, the subtle betrayals, the slow, creeping poison that was seeping into the heart of Asgard itself. And at the center of this poison was a figure of mesmerizing charm and devastating cunning. He was not a god by birth, but a giant, a trickster who had been welcomed into Asgard by Odin himself. His name was Loki. Loki was a master of words, a weaver of lies, a shapeshifter who could be anything or anyone he chose. He was the god of mischief, and his pranks ranged from the harmlessly amusing to the dangerously cruel. But beneath his playful exterior lay a dark and bitter heart, a heart that festered with jealousy and resentment. He was the catalyst, the spark that would ignite the flames of Ragnarok. For now, an uneasy peace reigned. The gods of Asgard held lavish feasts in their golden halls, their laughter echoing through the clouds. The warriors of Valhalla clashed their swords in endless, joyous combat. The mortals of Midgard went about their lives, unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding above them. But the signs were there for those who knew how to read them. The winters were growing longer and colder. The sun and the moon seemed to grow pale, as if they were being stalked by unseen predators. The great world tree, Yggdrasil, whose roots and branches held the 9 realms together, trembled as if in a fever. In the realm of the giants, Jötunn, a place of jagged mountains and frozen wastes, the ancient enemies of the gods were stirring. Their king, a monstrous being of immense power, was gathering his forces. In the fiery depths of Muspelheim, the fire giants were forging weapons of unimaginable destruction. And in the shadowy realm of Hel, ruled by Loki's own daughter, the goddess of death, an army of the dead was being assembled. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to break. The prophecies of the seeresses, the warnings of the wise, the fears of a worried father, all pointed to one inevitable conclusion. The end was near. The age of the gods was coming to a close, and a new, darker age was about to dawn. The threads of fate were being pulled taut, and the first notes of a symphony of destruction were being played. This was just the beginning of the end, the quiet before the storm. The stage was set, the players were in their places, and the first act of the great and terrible play of Ragnarok was about to begin. And we, dear listeners, will be here to witness it all, to see the fall of gods and the rise of a new world from the ashes of the old. Join us next time as the first signs of the apocalypse begin to manifest, and the gods of Asgard are forced to confront the terrible truth they have so long tried to deny. The twilight of the gods is upon us, and the darkness is gathering. In the heart of Asgard, where the golden light never faded, lived a god who was the embodiment of that light itself. He was Brandon, the son of Odin and Frigg. Where he walked, flowers bloomed in his footsteps, and his laughter was the sound of summer brooks. He was the god of light, joy, and purity, and he was loved by all beings in all the 9 realms. His presence was a balm to the soul, a constant reassurance that there was still good and beauty in a world that held so much darkness. But recently, a shadow had fallen over Brandon. He was plagued by nightmares, visions of a dark and final sleep from which he could not wake. The joy began to fade from his eyes, replaced by a deep and unsettling fear. His mother, Queen Frigg, saw the terror in her son's heart, and it mirrored her own deepest anxieties. The visions she had long held at bay were now manifesting in her beloved child's dreams. She would not stand by and let fate claim him. And so, Frigg embarked upon a desperate quest. She traveled the length and breadth of the 9 realms, her regal authority powered by a mother's fierce love. She spoke to fire and water, to iron and all other metals. She pleaded with stones and earth, with trees and every sickness. She commanded every animal, bird, and venomous serpent. From each and every one, she extracted a solemn oath. They would not harm her son, Brandon. They all agreed, for who could deny the mother of the sun god, who would want to bring darkness to the world? When Frigg returned to Asgard, her heart was lighter. She had woven a shield of promises around her son. He was invincible. To celebrate, the gods devised a new entertainment. They would gather in the great field of Idavol, and they would test Brandon's newfound invincibility. At first, it was small things. A pebble, a twig. When they bounced off him without leaving a scratch, their confidence grew. Soon, the greatest warriors were hurling their weapons with all their might. Axes, spears, even massive boulders were thrown at the smiling god, and every object would either swerve away at the last second or shatter harmlessly against him. The gods would roar with laughter and relief. It was a joyous spectacle, a testament to Frigg's love and Brandon's purity. All the gods, that is, except one. Loki watched these games not with joy, but with a simmering, acidic envy. He saw the adoration in every eye, heard the love in every cheer, and it twisted something dark within him. Why should Brandon be the center of all this affection? Why should he be so perfect, so untouchable? This invulnerability wasn't a gift, Loki thought. It was an arrogance. It was a challenge. And Loki was never one to refuse a challenge. He shapeshifted, cloaking himself in the guise of a frail, elderly woman, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. In this form, he hobbled to Frigg's grand hall, Fenrir, where the queen was observing the celebration from her window, a proud smile on her face. The old woman struck up a conversation with the queen, praising the god's new sport. "It is a marvelous thing," the disguised Loki croaked, "to see your son so honored, so beloved, and so perfectly safe. Did you truly get an oath from everything in creation?" Frigg, swelled with pride and the relief of a mother whose child is safe, laughed softly. Oh, almost everything, she confided, her guard lowered by the harmless appearance of the old woman. As I traveled east of Valhalla, I saw a small shrub growing. It's called mistletoe. It seemed so young, so harmless. I didn't think it was worth troubling for an oath. The words hung in the air, and for Loki, they were the key to a locked door. A small, insignificant plant, the perfect tool for a god of mischief. He gave the queen his thanks and hobbled away, his mind racing. He journeyed immediately to the place Frigg had described and found the mistletoe, just as she had said. He plucked a branch and, with his sinister skill, whittled it into a sharp, slender dart. He then returned to the field of Idavol, where the games were still in full swing. He noticed one god standing apart from the rest, near the edge of the crowd. It was Howard, Brandon's own brother. Howard was blind, and so he could not participate in the throwing, unable to aim or even to see the spectacle of his brother's invincibility. He could only listen to the sounds of revelry, a lonely figure in the midst of celebration. Loki approached him, his voice smooth and friendly. "Howard, my friend," he said, "why do you not join the others in honoring your brother? Does it not seem a slight to him that you are the only one not to test his strength?" Howard's face fell. "I cannot," he said sadly. "I have no weapon, and even if I did, I am blind. I cannot see where to throw." Loki's smile was a predator's grin. "Nonsense," he purred. "A small thing like that shouldn't stop you from showing your love. Here." He pressed the mistletoe dart into Howard's hand. "This is but a small twig. It will do no harm. And I will stand behind you and guide your arm, so you may aim true and share in the honor." Howard, trusting and eager to be included, agreed. He took a stance, the mistletoe dart held tight in his hand. Loki stood behind him, placing his hands on Howard's arm, a guiding touch that was pure betrayal. With Loki's direction, Howard threw the dart. It flew straight and true, a tiny, harmless-looking sliver arcing through the air. Unlike the swords and axes, it did not swerve. It did not shatter. It struck Brandon in the chest. A look of surprise crossed the sun god's face. He stumbled, the laughter dying on his lips. And then, before the horrified eyes of all the gods, Brandon, the light of Asgard, the beloved, the invincible, fell to the ground, dead. For a long moment, there was only silence, a profound, terrible silence that was heavier and more final than any sound. The gods were struck speechless, frozen by a grief so immense and so sudden they could not comprehend it. The joyous game had become a funeral. The invulnerable god lay slain. The first true sorrow had come to Asgard, and the first murder had stained its golden fields. This was no longer mischief. This was an act of war, a betrayal so deep it tore the fabric of their world. The prophecy had begun. The first great domino had fallen, and its fall echoed through the 9 realms, a death knell for the age of the gods. The long, cold winter was no longer coming. It was here. The silence that fell upon the golden fields of Asgard was a living thing, a crushing weight of despair. The gods, who had known only triumph and boisterous joy, were now paralyzed by a grief they had never imagined possible. Odin, the All-Father, was the first to move. He knelt beside his fallen son, Brandon, and the look on his face was one of ancient, prophetic sorrow finally realized. All his preparations, all his wisdom, had not been enough to stop this. Thor gripped his hammer, Mjolnir, so tightly his knuckles turned white, a storm of rage and confusion brewing in his eyes. But there was no giant to smash, no monster to fight. The enemy was a traitor from within, and the weapon was a simple betrayal. It was Queen Frigg, Brandon's mother, whose heart was the most shattered, who broke the spell of silent horror. Her scream was not one of rage, but of pure, undiluted agony that seemed to shake the foundations of Asgard. But from the depths of that pain, a desperate hope emerged. "He cannot be lost to us," she cried, her voice trembling but firm, addressing the assembled gods. "His light cannot be extinguished forever. There must be a way." She turned her gaze toward the path that led down from Asgard, the path that wound its way through the dark roots of the World Tree. Someone must ride to the realm of the dead. Someone must go to Hela and bargain for the return of my son's soul. The realm of the dead. Hel. A place of eternal twilight ruled by Loki's own daughter, Hela. She was a grim and formidable figure, half beautiful woman, half-decaying corpse, a queen who ruled with an iron and impartial hand over all who died of sickness or old age. No god had ever journeyed there willingly and returned. The path itself was a trial, a journey of 9 days and 9 nights through valleys so deep and dark that the sun was a forgotten memory. It was a quest that required not just strength, but unwavering courage and incredible speed. A hush fell over the gods. Who would dare undertake such a perilous mission? Then, a young god stepped forward. It was Carter, known as the Swift, another of Odin's sons, famed for his bravery and his unmatched speed. "I will go," he said, his voice clear and resolute. "I will not rest until I have pleaded our case before the Queen of the Dead." Odin looked at Carter with a mixture of pride and fear. He nodded once, a gesture of grim acceptance. He led Carter to the celestial stables and brought forth his own personal mount, the greatest of all horses, Sleipnir. Sleipnir was a magnificent gray stallion with 8 powerful legs, a steed that could gallop on the sea and through the air, and most importantly, could travel the road to the dead. Without another word, Carter mounted the great horse, and they were off, a gray streak against the fading light of Asgard. For 9 nights they rode, through a landscape drained of all color and warmth. The sound of Sleipnir's 8 hooves was the only thing that broke the oppressive silence. They crossed treacherous, echoing chasms and barren plains of dust. Finally, they came to a great river, its waters roaring with the sound of clashing swords. Spanning it was a bridge, glittering as if made of pure gold. As Carter started to cross, a skeletal figure in armor blocked his path. This was Madeline, the guardian of the bridge. "No living man may cross," she rasped, her voice like grinding stones. "The bridge groans more under you alone than it did yesterday, under 5 battalions of the dead. You do not have the pallor of death. Why do you ride the road to hell?" Carter, his heart pounding but his voice steady, replied, "I ride to seek Brandon, who has been slain. Have you seen him pass this way?" Madeline gestured down the bridge with a bony hand. "He has. The road to hell lies downward and to the north." Carter urged Sleipnir onward, galloping down the dark path until he came to a massive, iron-wrought gate. This was the entrance to Hell's domain. The gate was barred, but Carter did not hesitate. He spurred the mighty Sleipnir, and the 8-legged steed leaped, clearing the towering gate in a single, breathtaking bound. They had arrived. The realm of Hela was a vast, misty hall filled with the silent, sorrowful shades of the dead. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne of bone, sat the queen herself. Hela regarded Carter's arrival with a cold, impassive gaze. Carter dismounted and approached the throne, his steps echoing in the cavernous silence. He did not bow in fear, but stood tall as a messenger of the gods. "Great Queen Hela," he began, his voice filled with the grief of his people. "I come on behalf of all Asgard, indeed, on behalf of all life. Brandon the Beautiful has been slain, and his loss has plunged the 9 realms into darkness and mourning. Every being weeps for him. I have been sent to ask you, to beg you, to release him. Let him ride back with me to the land of the living." Hela listened, her expression unreadable. For a long time, she said nothing. The silence stretched, thick with the finality of her realm. When she finally spoke, her voice was like the cracking of ice. "It is true," she said, "that Brandon was greatly loved. I will know if what you say is true. I will put this love to the test." She leaned forward on her throne, her gaze piercing Carter's very soul. "If all things in the 9 realms, alive and dead, weep for him, then he shall return to Asgard. But if even one thing, a single being, speaks against him or refuses to shed a tear, then he shall remain here with me forever." It was a challenge, a monumental task, but it was also a sliver of hope. A chance. Carter's heart soared. Surely, no one would refuse to weep for Brandon. The love for him was universal. "It shall be done," Carter promised. He turned and mounted Sleipnir, filled with a new and urgent purpose. He galloped from the great hall and leaped back over the gate, beginning the long ride back to Asgard. He carried with him not a guarantee, but a quest for the gods. Their grief must now become their tool. They had to inspire a universal sorrow, a wave of mourning so powerful it would move the heart of death itself. The fate of Brandon, and perhaps the fate of them all, now rested not on a battle of swords, but on the weight of tears. The gods of Asgard stood in solemn vigil, their grief a heavy cloak upon the once joyful city. They were preparing for the final, sorrowful rite, the funeral of their fallen star, Brandon. As they made their preparations, a lone rider was spotted on the horizon, galloping with an impossible speed that could only belong to one steed. It was Carter, returning from the dark realm of Hell, Sleipnir's 8 hooves thundering across the Bifrost Bridge. A tense silence fell over the assembled gods. Every eye was fixed on the messenger, searching his face for a glimmer of hope or the finality of doom. Carter reined in the great horse and leaped from its back, his face etched with the weariness of his journey, but his eyes alight with urgent purpose. He strode before Odin and Frigg and relayed the words of Hela, the queen of the dead. He told them of her challenge, her grim test of love. Brandon could return, his soul could be freed from the cold grasp of Hell, but only if every single thing in all the 9 realms, living or not, wept for him. If one voice remained silent, if one eye remained dry, he would be lost to them forever. A collective breath was released. It was not a no. It was a chance, a path forward, however narrow and difficult it may be. The task was monumental, but the love for Brandon was a force of nature. Surely, this was a test they could pass. But first, they had to honor him. They carried Brandon's body, pale and still, to the shore of the great celestial sea. There awaited his ship, the Horizon's Edge, the largest and most magnificent vessel ever built, a fitting pyre for a god of his stature. They placed their beloved Brandon upon it, but when the time came to push the great ship into the water, it would not budge. The strongest of the gods, even the mighty Thor, put their shoulders to the hull, but it was as if the ship itself were anchored by the weight of their sorrow. It was too heavy for them to move. Seeing their struggle, a message was sent to the realm of the giants, Jötunn. For this task, they needed a power beyond their own. They sent for a giantess, known for her cataclysmic strength, a being of raw, elemental force named Roxanne. Her arrival was a spectacle of primal terror and might. She rode not a horse, but a colossal wolf, its eyes burning like embers, and in her hands, she held writhing vipers for reins. She dismounted, her sheer presence making the very ground tremble. She walked to the stern of the Horizon's Edge, planted her feet, and gave a single, monumental shove. With a sound like an earthquake, the ship lurched forward. The wooden rollers beneath the keel burst into flames from the friction, and the earth shook so violently that the gods had to steady themselves. The great vessel slid into the sea, sending a tidal wave crashing back against the shore. Thor, ever distrustful of giants, was enraged by this chaotic display of power and raised his hammer to strike her down. But the other gods intervened, staying his hand, reminding him that they had needed her strength. Roxanne gave them a scornful look and departed as she had come, a whirlwind of untamed power. Now the final farewell could begin. Brandon was laid upon a bier in the center of the ship. His wife, Nina, who had watched the entire scene with a silent, bottomless grief, suddenly let out a cry and collapsed, her heart having broken from the sheer weight of her sorrow. In a final act of love and tragedy, her body was placed on the pyre beside her husband's. Odin stepped forward and laid a final gift upon his son's chest, his magical golden ring, the Multiplier, which had the power to create 8 identical copies of itself every 9th night. It was a treasure of infinite wealth, now offered to the king of the dead. Finally, Thor stepped forward and consecrated the pyre with his hammer, Mjolnir, whispering a final, booming farewell. The pyre was lit, and the Horizon's Edge, now a floating funeral pyre, was pushed out to sea, a blazing star of farewell against the twilight sky. With the funeral rites complete, the gods turned to their desperate task. They dispatched messengers in every direction, to every corner of the 9 realms. They traveled to Midgard, the world of mortals, and told the story of Brandon's death. And the humans wept. They traveled to the hidden forests of the elves, and the elves, lovers of light and beauty, shed silver tears. They went deep into the mountains to the halls of the dwarves, and the grim, stone-hearted craftsmen wept, their tears hardening into beads of sorrowful iron. The messengers went further still. They called upon the very elements of the world, and the earth itself wept, its tears appearing as the morning dew on the grass. The stones in the fields grew damp with sorrow. The trees wept their sap, and the hardest metals in the deepest mines seemed to sweat with a cold, metallic grief. A great wave of mourning washed over all of creation. It seemed the test would be met. Victory was within their grasp. The messengers, their task nearly complete, were returning to Asgard, their hearts full of hope. On their journey, they passed a dark, secluded cave in a remote corner of the giant lands. Thinking it best to leave no stone unturned, they entered. Inside, huddled by a dying fire, sat a single, ancient giantess. She was withered and grim, her face a mask of bitter frost. The messengers respectfully told her their story, of the beautiful god who was slain, of the bargain with Hela, and of the universal weeping. They pleaded with her, "We ask only for your tears, to help us bring the light back into the world." The old giantess looked at them with eyes as cold and hard as flint. She let out a dry, rasping cackle that echoed in the dark cave. "With dry tears I will weep for Brandon's funeral," she sneered. "Let Hela keep what she has. I have no love for the living or the dead." The messengers stood in stunned silence. One refusal, a single, heartless refusal. After all their work, after uniting the entire world in a chorus of grief, their quest had failed at the final hurdle. As they stared in disbelief at the cruel face of the old giantess, a flicker of recognition passed through their minds. Beneath the withered disguise, there was a familiar, malevolent gleam in her eyes. The gleam of the trickster, the gleam of Loki. The messengers returned to Asgard not with the joyous news of a world united in sorrow, but with the hollow echo of a single, cruel refusal. They delivered the giantess's final, venomous words to the waiting gods. A profound stillness fell over the city, a silence far heavier than the one that had followed Brandon's death. That had been the silence of shock and grief. This was the silence of hope extinguished, the silence of finality. Brandon was lost. He was never coming back. Frigg's desperate quest, which had united the 9 realms, had failed at the very last step. Her wail of renewed sorrow was the sound of a mother's heart breaking for the second and final time. As the gods absorbed this devastating blow, the messengers spoke again, their voices low and grim. They described the old woman in the cave, her cold eyes, and the familiar, malevolent intelligence that lurked behind the disguise. There was no doubt in their minds. The giantess, who called herself Ash, was none other than Loki. The realization rippled through the assembled gods, and their immense grief began to curdle, hardening into a cold and diamond-hard fury. This was the ultimate betrayal. Loki had not only engineered the murder of their most beloved, but he had also single-handedly sabotaged their only chance to undo the tragedy. He had danced on Brandon's grave and mocked their tears. Odin's face, which had been a mask of sorrow, became a thundercloud of righteous wrath. His one eye blazed with a fearsome light. "Enough," his voice boomed, shaking the very stones of Asgard. "The age of mischief is over. The time for forgiveness is past. Loki is no longer a son of Asgard, welcome or otherwise. He is our enemy. He is a traitor. He will be hunted, he will be caught, and he will pay for what he has done." This was no mere pronouncement. It was a declaration of war. The hunt for Loki began at once. A party of the strongest and wisest gods, led by the thunderous Thor and a god named Kevin, renowned for his unmatched wisdom and insight, set out from the city gates. Their mission was not to reason or to bargain, but to capture. Loki, meanwhile, knew retribution was coming. The moment the messengers left his cave, he had shed his disguise and fled. His cunning mind, usually filled with schemes and pranks, was now consumed by a gnawing paranoia. He ran to the most remote corner of the realms, to a lonely mountain overlooking a rushing river with a great waterfall. There, he built a strange house for himself, with a door on each of its 4 walls, allowing him to watch for approaching danger from every direction. He was a prisoner of his own crime, constantly looking over his shoulder. His days were spent in a state of high alert. Often, he would transform himself into a sleek, silver salmon, his favorite disguise, and hide in the clear, cold waters of the river, feeling the currents and listening for the footsteps of his pursuers. Even in his human form, his thoughts were of capture. As he sat by his hearth one day, he began weaving threads of flax into a mesh. He was creating something new, the world's very first fishing net, all the while pondering, if I were a fish, how would they try to catch me? He was, in essence, designing his own trap. His foresight proved true. The gods, guided by Kevin's uncanny wisdom, had tracked him to the remote mountain. As Kevin examined the area, He pieced together the clues Loki had left behind and pointed towards the strange house on the peak. Loki, ever watchful, saw them coming from afar. In a flash of panic, he threw his newly made net into the fire, hoping to destroy the evidence of his paranoid thoughts. He then ran from the house, leaped into the waterfall, and in a splash of silver, became the salmon once more, disappearing into the raging torrent. When the gods reached the abandoned house, it was empty. Thor wanted to tear it apart stone by stone, but Kevin motioned him towards the hearth. There, in the white ash of the fire, was the distinct, diamond-shaped pattern of the burnt net. Kevin's eyes lit with understanding. He fears being caught as a fish, he explained. He has shown us the very tool we need to capture him. Working quickly, the gods replicated the design, weaving a great net of their own. They waded into the river, 2 groups of gods holding either end, and began to drag it downstream. The chase was on. Loki, in his salmon form, was impossibly fast and agile. He saw the net coming and dove deep, pressing his slippery body into a narrow crevice between 2 large stones on the riverbed. The net passed right over him. The gods, feeling the line go slack, knew he had escaped. They dragged the river a second time, but this time they weighed the bottom of the net with stones so it would scrape the riverbed. Loki saw this and knew his previous trick would not work. He waited until the last possible second, and with a powerful flick of his tail, he leaped high out of the water, clearing the top of the net and making for the freedom of the open sea. But as he soared through the air in a glittering arc, a figure was waiting for him on the riverbank. It was Thor. His reflexes were as fast as his thunder. He lunged forward, not with his hammer, but with his bare hands. He caught the salmon midair. Loki twisted and writhed, his slippery scales making him almost impossible to hold, but Thor's grip was the most powerful force in all the realms. He squeezed tighter, his fingers digging into the fish's tail. The trickster struggled, but it was no use. He was caught. Thor held the thrashing salmon in his iron fist, his face a grim mask of triumph and fury. Loki's flight was over. His freedom was at an end. Now his judgment, and a punishment beyond his darkest nightmares, was about to begin. Thor's grip was absolute. The writhing, silver salmon in his hand shimmered and contorted, and with a final, violent spasm, it transformed. No longer a fish, but the god Loki, gasping for air on the riverbank, his face a mask of pure terror. The chase was over. He was surrounded. The faces of the gods who looked down upon him were not the familiar faces of his former friends and companions. They were grim, stone-like visages of judges, their eyes holding no pity, only the cold, hard light of justice. There were no witty retorts, no clever escapes left for the trickster. He was utterly and completely at their mercy. They did not enact their sentence there on the sunlit riverbank. That would have been too quick, too clean. Instead, they bound him in temporary chains and began a grim procession, dragging their captive away from the world of light. They took him to a place of dread, a deep and dismal cave far from the golden halls of Asgard, a place where the sun never reached. The air was cold and heavy with the scent of wet stone and ancient despair. This was to be his prison. This was to be his place of torment. But physical restraint was only the beginning of their vengeance. The gods' justice was to be as cruel and as personal as Loki's own crime had been. They sent for his 2 sons, born of his wife in Asgard, 2 young men named Vincent and Nathan. They were brought before their captive father, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Loki cried out, pleading with the gods to leave his children out of it, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. They believed his treachery had poisoned his entire bloodline, and his punishment was to witness the horrific fruits of his own evil. Odin raised a hand, and a terrible, chilling magic filled the cavern. Before his family's horrified eyes, young Vincent began to change. His limbs twisted and elongated, coarse fur sprouted from his skin, and his screams of terror warped into the savage snarl of a wolf. The gods had forcibly transformed him into a mindless, ravenous beast. The wolf, driven by an unnatural bloodlust, saw only one thing: its brother. Before anyone could intervene, it lunged, and in a flurry of teeth and claws, the wolf that was once Vincent tore his brother Nathan apart. Loki was forced to watch it all, his screams of denial and anguish echoing uselessly in the cold, dark cave. His greatest crime had been to cause a brother to kill a brother, and now that same tragedy was visited upon his own children in the most gruesome way imaginable. The gods' grim work was not yet finished. From the body of the slain Nathan, they took that which had given him life, and with their divine power, they forged these grisly remains into 3 chains of unbreakable, living iron. With these terrible fetters, they bound Loki. They laid him across 3 massive, sharp-edged slabs of rock. The first was placed beneath his shoulders, the second under his hips, and the third behind his knees, contorting his body into a position of perpetual agony. The chains, born of his own son's death, tightened and fused with the rock, holding him fast. He was trapped, utterly immobile, a prisoner of his own making. Even this was not the end. The gods' fury demanded a torment that would last for ages. They found a monstrous, venomous serpent and placed it on the rock shelf directly above Loki's head. The creature's fangs dripped a constant, slow stream of a black, acidic venom. Each drop that fell onto the helpless god's face was a splash of liquid fire, a searing agony that brought fresh screams from his raw throat. This was to be his fate until the end of time, to lie bound in darkness, tormented by the memory of his children's fate, and subjected to the unending torture of the serpent's poison. The gods departed, leaving him to his eternal punishment. They sealed the cave, and darkness and agony became Loki's entire world. Yet he was not left completely alone. One person in all the 9 realms still held love for him. His loyal wife, a goddess named Sarah, had followed the grim procession from afar. When the gods were gone, she found her way into the cave. Seeing her husband's torment, her heart broke, but she did not flee. In an act of incredible devotion, she knelt by his side, holding a wooden bowl above his face to catch the burning venom. Her love became his only shield against the constant pain. But the bowl was finite. When it filled to the brim, she was forced to turn away for a moment to empty it. In that brief instant, the serpent's venom would once again drip onto Loki's skin. The pain was so sudden, so explosive, that his body would convulse against his iron bonds with unimaginable violence. He would thrash so powerfully that the very foundations of the world would shake. The mortals in Midgard, feeling the ground tremble and the mountain shudder, would look to the sky in fear, calling these terrifying events earthquakes, never knowing they were feeling the echoes of a tortured god's eternal agony, bound in a dark cave at the edge of the world. With Loki bound in his final, spiteful act sealing Brandon's fate in the realm of the dead, a profound change began to ripple across the 9 realms. The light of the world had truly been extinguished. Brandon was not just the god of joy and purity. He was the god of summer, of warmth, of life itself. With him gone, a chilling gloom began to settle, not just in the hearts of the gods, but into the very fabric of the world. The laughter in Asgard's halls was gone, replaced by grim councils of war. And in Midgard, the world of mortals, the consequences were far more immediate and far more brutal. The prophecies had a name for this time. They called it the Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. It began without warning. The autumn harvest failed, the leaves fell from the trees, and the cold winds began to blow. But they did not stop. Winter came, fierce and unforgiving, and it did not leave. There was no spring to follow, no summer to bring warmth and life. There was only winter, followed by another winter, and then another. For 3 long, relentless years, the world was buried in ice and snow. Snow, driven by howling winds, fell from every direction at once, piling in drifts that buried homes and forests. The great rivers and even the seas froze solid, creating stark bridges of ice to lands once separated by water. The sun grew pale and listless in the sky, a smear of washed-out light, offering no warmth. The moon, when it appeared, seemed haunted and distant. A deep, biting frost covered everything, and the world became a monochrome landscape of gray and white. Life became a desperate struggle for survival against the overwhelming cold. In the world of mortals, this endless winter broke more than just the landscape. It broke the very bonds of society. With no crops and dwindling resources, the laws and morals that held humanity together shattered like brittle ice. It became an age of desperation. Oaths were broken, honor was forgotten, and survival became the only virtue. Brother turned against brother for a mouthful of food. Children were abandoned, and fathers and sons raised weapons against one another. It was, as the prophecies foretold, an axe age, a sword age, where shields were cloven, and no one showed mercy to another. Humanity, without the light of the gods to guide it, had descended into savagery. And as the world of men tore itself apart, the cosmos itself began to unravel. High in the heavens, a terrifying, ancient chase was nearing its conclusion. Since the dawn of time, two colossal wolves, Skoll and Hati, had pursued the sun and the moon across the sky. For millennia, the celestial bodies had been swift enough to escape their jaws. But in the growing chaos of the Fimbulwinter, they began to tire and falter. The wolves, sensing victory, grew stronger and faster. The gods would look up and see the fangs of the great beasts snapping ever closer to the edges of the sun and moon, a horrifying reminder that the very lights of the sky were about to be extinguished. Deep within the earth, the tremors grew more violent. Loki's torment in his dark cave intensified. Each drop of venom that seared his flesh sent a fresh wave of agony through him, and his thrashing against his bonds shook the world with ever-increasing fury. Mountains crumbled, and great chasms split the frozen ground. The great world tree, Yggdrasil, which held the 9 realms in its branches and roots, groaned and shuddered from the constant abuse, its leaves turning yellow and beginning to fall. The pillar of the universe was beginning to fail. Then came the final warning. The prelude was over. The time had come. Across the fractured cosmos, 3 great horns sounded, 3 terrible calls to arms. In the highest branches of Yggdrasil, in the halls of Asgard, a golden rooster, known as Goldcomb, crowed loud and clear. It was a piercing alarm that awoke the gods from their grim watch and called the souls of the heroic dead in Valhalla to take up their arms and armor. This was the moment they had trained for. This was the call to the final battle. At the very same moment, in the frozen, mountainous realm of Jötunn, a second, fiery red rooster crowed, its call echoing through the valleys of the giants. It was their signal, the horn that roused the ancient enemies of the gods from their slumber and bade them to muster their forces for war. And deep below the earth, in the silent, shadowy halls of hell, a third, soot-colored rooster let out a cry that stirred the pale legions of the dishonorable dead. Hela's army was now on the march. The 3 calls echoed across the realms, a terrifying, overlapping chorus of impending doom. The gods, the giants, and the dead. All were now awake, all were now armed, all were now marching. The great winter had served its purpose, scouring the world and preparing it for the end. The ancient bonds were breaking, the armies were gathering, and the sky itself was about to fall. Ragnarok was no longer a distant prophecy. It was here. The 3 rooster calls were not just an alarm. They were a catalyst. They were the final vibration that, when added to the shuddering of the Fimbulwinter and the groaning of the world tree, pushed the fractured cosmos past its breaking point. Deep in the sealed cave where Loki lay bound, the world convulsed with a final, cataclysmic tremor. It was a quake of such impossible violence that it tore the mountains from their roots. And in that great, wrenching heave of the earth, every bond, every fetter, and every chain in the 9 realms was shattered. The first to break were the chains of iron, forged from the entrails of his own murdered son, that held Loki to the stones. With a grinding shriek of tearing metal and splintering rock, they snapped. After ages of torment, Loki was free. He staggered from the darkness of the cave, a gaunt and terrifying figure. The venom had scarred his once handsome face, and his body was twisted from millennia of agony. But his eyes, which had once danced with mischief, now burned with a cold, patient fire of pure, undiluted hatred. He was no longer a trickster. He was an architect of annihilation, and his first act was to seek out his other children. His freedom was echoed by that of his most feared son, the monstrous wolf Fenrir. Long ago, the gods, terrified by prophecies of the wolf's role in their destruction, had tricked him into being bound by a magical ribbon, slender as silk but stronger than any chain. For an age, Fenrir had been imprisoned on a lonely island, a sword propping his jaws eternally open. But in the great earthquake, that ribbon, that impossible bond, frayed and snapped. Fenrir's howl of freedom was a sound of pure apocalypse, a roar that split the heavens. He was a beast of cosmic scale. When he opened his great maw, his lower jaw scraped the frozen earth, while his upper jaw brushed the starless sky. Fire poured from his eyes and nostrils as he began to rampage across the world, devouring everything in his path. In the depths of the poison seas, another of Loki's children stirred. The world serpent, the great beast that encircled the entirety of Midgard, had held the world together for millennia by biting its own tail. Now, Rocked by the planet's death throes, the serpent released its hold. The circle was broken. With a surge that dwarfed any tidal wave, the monster rose from the abyssal depths. Its colossal head, dripping with black venom, blotted out the pale sun. It thrashed its massive coils, and the oceans of the world rose in catastrophic floods, drowning the lands that the Fimbulwinter had not already buried in ice. The serpent spewed its venom into the air, turning the sky a sickly green and poisoning the very winds, ensuring that anything that survived the floods would choke on the toxic fumes. With the world's greatest monsters unleashed, the armies of destruction began their final march. From the east, from the frozen realm of Jötunn, came a horrifying vessel. It was a ship called Naglfar, built entirely from the uncut fingernails and toenails of the human dead, a grotesque monument to dishonor. At its helm stood the newly freed Loki, his face a mask of vengeful glee, guiding this ship of horrors across the risen oceans. Aboard it was the entire host of the Frost Giants, armed with weapons of ice and stone, their king, Reimr, bellowing war cries that were carried on the poisoned wind. From the south came a different kind of terror. The sky split open, revealing the fiery, molten realm of Muspelheim. From this inferno marched the Fire Giants, a legion of living flame. At their head was their ruler, Surtur, a being of primordial fire whose existence predated that of the gods themselves. In his hand, he wielded a sword that burned with the fire of the sun, a blade destined to set the world ablaze. As they marched, the very ground turned to lava beneath their feet, and the celestial Bifrost Bridge, the rainbow path to Asgard, shattered and collapsed into dust behind them. From below, the earth itself seemed to vomit forth its dead. The gates of hell were thrown open, and the silent, grim army of the dishonored dead marched forth, a pale tide of spectral warriors. Leading the vanguard was Garm, the monstrous hellhound that had once guarded the gates, now freed from his post, his howls echoing with the misery of 1,000 lifetimes. All these forces of annihilation, all these ancient hatreds and unleashed monsters had a single destination. They moved across the ruined world by land and by sea, a pincer of fire, ice, and death. Their target was a vast, barren plain designated by prophecy for the final confrontation, the Plain of Judgment. In Asgard, on the last remaining watchtower, the god Heimdall, the ever-vigilant sentry, saw them coming. He saw the fire from the south and the frost from the east. He saw Fenrir devouring the world and the serpent poisoning the sky. He saw Loki, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer, steering the ship of nails. And seeing this, Heimdall raised his great horn, Gjallarhorn, to his lips and blew a single, soul-shaking blast. The sound carried across what was left of the 9 realms. It was not an alarm. It was an answer. The challenge had been issued. The age of gods and monsters was about to end in a final, glorious, and terrible war. The blast from Heimdall's horn, Gjallarhorn, was a sound unlike any other. It was not a call of victory or a signal of alarm, but a note of pure, world-ending finality. It ripped through the poisoned air, a golden thread of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The sound echoed in the deserted golden halls of Asgard. It thundered through the feasting hall of Valhalla, and it shook the great world tree, Yggdrasil, to its very roots. For the gods, it was the sound they had been dreading and preparing for since the beginning of time. The final war had come to their doorstep. The sound reached Odin, the Allfather, as he stood grimly observing the chaos from his high seat. He felt the great tree shudder, the pillar of the cosmos now in its death throes. A deep sorrow filled him, not of fear, but of a king witnessing the end of his kingdom. He knew that strength alone would not be enough to face what was coming. He needed wisdom. Mounting his 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, he made one last pilgrimage. He rode to the Well of Ord, where the threads of fate were woven, and there he sought the counsel of the Head of Wisdom, the preserved head of the sage Mimir. As he had done an age ago when he sacrificed his eye for a drink from its waters, he now sought a final piece of guidance. The ancient head spoke, its voice a whisper of rustling leaves, confirming the grim prophecies, speaking not of victory, but of the necessity of courage in the face of inescapable doom. Fate could not be unwritten, but it could be met with honor. Odin returned to Asgard, his face set with grim resolve. The gods were already arming themselves, the clang of armor and the drawing of weapons replacing the sounds of laughter and music that once filled the city. The mood was somber, heavy with the weight of destiny. This was not a preparation for a glorious battle, but for a necessary end. Thor, his eyes crackling with lightning, went to his chariot. He pulled on his iron gauntlets, tightened his belt of might which doubled his already immense strength, and took up his hammer, Mjolnir. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, seeking out the churning, poisoned seas. He had only one foe on his mind, his ancient nemesis, the world serpent. Frederick, the golden god of peace and harvest, a being who preferred the warmth of the sun to the cold of steel, sadly took up his battle gear. He was a tragic figure on this day of war, for he had long ago given away his enchanted sword, the only weapon capable of fighting on its own, to win the love of a giantess. Now, as he prepared to face the fiery Lord Surtur, he was armed with nothing but a simple antler. His past sacrifice for love would now cost him his life. Nearby, the god Tyrone, the one-handed lord of justice and law, strapped a shield to his remaining arm. He had lost his hand ages ago, willingly sacrificing it in the jaws of the wolf Fenrir in order to bind him. Now, as Fenrir's kin, the hellhound Garm, howled on the battlefield, Tyrone's fight was deeply personal. Finally, Odin himself prepared for war. The All-Father donned his magnificent golden helmet shaped like an eagle, pulled on his coat of shining mail, and took up his mighty spear, Gungnir, an enchanted weapon that was destined to never miss its mark. He was no longer just a king of wisdom. He was a warrior king, ready to lead his people into their final hour. As the gods assembled, the great bronze gates of Valhalla were thrown open. From within marched the Einherjar, the chosen host of the heroic dead. These were the souls of the greatest mortal warriors, handpicked by the Valkyries from the battlefields of Midgard. For centuries, they had feasted, drunk, and fought in Odin's hall, training and honing their skills for this one single day. An army of countless thousands, their spirits burning like white-hot stars, they formed up behind the gods, their voices joined in a single, thunderous war cry. They were humanity's finest, ready to make their last stand alongside their divine lords. With his army assembled, Odin mounted Sleipnir. He raised his spear, and with the gods of Asgard at his side and the shining army of Valhalla at his back, he led them from the city. They thundered across the shattered remnants of the Rainbow Bridge, their golden banners a stark contrast to the gray, poisoned sky. They marched onto the ruined plains of Midgard, now a desolate wasteland of ice, floodwater, and gaping chasms. They were a shining river of steel and gold, a final bastion of light and order against a tide of utter chaos. Their march ended at the Plain of Judgment, and there they saw their enemy. It was a sight to break the spirit of any lesser army. A grotesque horde stretched as far as the eye could see. There were the frost giants, their bodies like walking glaciers, led by Loki aboard his ship of nails. There was the wolf Fenrir, a gaping maw of hunger and destruction. There were the fire giants, an advancing wall of flame with the blazing sword of Surtur at its heart. And behind them all, a silent, endless legion of the pale dead. The air was thick with the serpent's venom and the black smoke from Muspelheim. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the two armies faced each other across the blasted plain. On one side, gods and heroes, a final stand for honor and memory. On the other, monsters and demons, the agents of oblivion. The time for preparation was over. The battle for the fate of the universe was about to begin. The moment of tense silence on the Plain of Judgment did not last. It was not broken, it was shattered. A single, unified roar of hatred erupted from the horde of monsters and giants, a sound that was a physical force, washing over the army of the gods. It was answered by the defiant, golden blast of Heimdall's horn and the thunderous war cry of the Einherjar. The battle for the end of the world began not with a strategic advance, but with a cataclysmic, headlong charge. The two armies crashed into one another with the force of colliding worlds, and the Great Plain became a maelstrom of fire and ice, of shining steel and monstrous flesh. At the very forefront of the divine army, Odin the All-Father, mounted on his 8-legged steed Sleipnir, did not charge into the rank and file. His one eye, blazing with a king's resolve, sought out the greatest of his foes. He lowered his spear Gungnir and aimed it at the heart of the chaos, at the ravenous, world-devouring wolf, Fenrir. He was a streak of gold and light, a king riding to meet his prophesied doom, determined to face it head-on. Fenrir, seeing the king of the gods approach, let out a howl that tore the clouds from the sky and charged to meet him, a gaping void of teeth and shadow, a force of pure, cosmic hunger. The clash was as swift as it was terrible. Odin, the master of war and wisdom, the most powerful of all the gods, fought with a fury born of ages. His spear was a blur of light, striking the great wolf again and again. But Fenrir was not a creature of flesh and blood that could be pierced by mortal means. He was an ending. He was oblivion personified. As Sleipnir reared to allow Odin another strike, the wolf lunged. Its great jaws, which stretched from the scarred earth to the poisoned sky, opened wide. For an instant, the All-Father was framed against a blackness deeper than any night, a cavern of infinite teeth. And then, in a single, horrifying gulp, it was over. The wolf's jaws snapped shut, and Odin, king of the gods, along with his mighty steed, was gone, devoured. The brightest light in the Norse pantheon was the first to be extinguished. A cry of despair rose from the gods and the Einherjar, but it was cut short by a roar of pure, focused vengeance. From the ranks of the gods strode a figure who had been quiet for most of his life, a god known for his silence and his grim purpose. This was Vidar, son of Odin. He had spent his life preparing for this one singular moment, to avenge his father's death. On one of his feet, he wore a massive boot, cobbled together from all the discarded leather scraps that mortal shoemakers had cut from the toes and heels of their shoes throughout history. It was an enchanted boot, thick, layered, and indestructible. Without hesitation, Vidar strode directly into the still open maw of the triumphant wolf. As Fenrir lunged to swallow him as he had his father, Vidar planted his massive boot on the beast's lower jaw, forcing it to the ground. The enchanted leather held firm against the monster's fangs. With his other hand, he reached up and seized the wolf's upper jaw, and with a surge of cosmic, grief-fueled strength, he pulled. With a sound like a mountain splitting in two, Vidar ripped the great wolf's head apart. The beast that had devoured the All-Father fell dead upon the battlefield, its reign of terror as short-lived as it was devastating. Vengeance had been served, but the cost was immeasurable. The king was dead. As this drama of patricide and vengeance unfolded, another, equally epic duel was taking place. Thor, the champion of humanity, did not wait for the battle to find him. He leaped from his goat-drawn chariot and strode through the chaos, his hammer Mjolnir crackling with lightning. He ignored the giants and the legions of the dead, his eyes locked on the colossal, thrashing form of his oldest and most hated enemy, the world serpent. The great beast, having flooded the world, was now on the battlefield, its coils crushing legions of warriors as it slithered through the mud, its head high in the air, spewing clouds of black venom. Thor let out a roar that was pure thunder and launched himself at the serpent. Their battle was a storm within a storm. Mjolnir crashed against the serpent's armored scales with the force of a falling mountain, and the serpent retaliated, lashing out with its tail and trying to ensnare the thunder god in its crushing coils. Lightning flashed, venom rained down, and the ground beneath them split and buckled from the sheer force of their combat. Finally, Thor saw an opening. Leaping high into the air, his muscles straining and his belt of might glowing with power, he brought Mjolnir down one last time directly on the serpent's massive head. There was a sickening crunch that echoed across the battlefield, and the great monster convulsed and fell, its immense body crashing to the ground and shaking the world one last time. Thor stood over the carcass of his slain foe, panting, victorious. He had done it. He had killed the world serpent. But as he stood in triumph, the dying beast, in its final throw, coughed a great torrent of its concentrated venom directly onto him, drenching the god of thunder from head to toe. Thor staggered back, his victory turning to ash in his mouth. He felt the poison burn through him, a fire in his veins. He took one step, then another. He managed 9 steps in total, a final, defiant walk away from his slain enemy. And then, the champion of Midgard, the mighty Thor, collapsed onto the blood-soaked earth, dead. The 2 greatest defenders of the 9 realms were gone, and the battle had only just begun. The fall of Odin and Thor sent a shockwave of despair through the divine ranks. Their king was gone, and their mightiest champion had fallen. For a heart-stopping moment, the glittering army of gods and heroes faltered. But despair on the battlefield is a luxury that leads only to death. Their grief was instantly forged into a hard, desperate resolve. They were no longer fighting for victory, but for memory. They fought for the All-Father who had foreseen this day and met it with courage. They fought for the Thunderer, who had died, defending the realms. They fought for the very idea of a world of light and order, even as it was being consumed by darkness. The battle on the Plain of Judgment raged on, a chaotic symphony of screaming steel and dying gods. Amidst the maelstrom, another fateful duel began. The golden god Frederick, the lord of sunshine and peaceful harvests, found his path blocked by a being of utter darkness and fire. It was Surtur, the ruler of Muspelheim, his massive form a moving silhouette against the inferno he brought with him. In his hand, his great sword burned with a light so intense it made the pale sun seem like a dying ember. Frederick, a god of peace now forced into the role of a warrior, gripped the only weapon he had, a simple stag's antler. He knew this was a fight he could not win. He had traded his self-fighting sword for love long ago, and now, at the end of the world, his past choices had come to collect their due. With a valiant cry, Frederick charged. He fought with a desperate bravery that stunned even the Fire Lord, dodging and weaving, striking at the giant's fiery hide with his primitive weapon. But it was a hopeless struggle. An antler cannot defeat a star. Surtur, with a contemptuous roar, swung his flaming sword in a great, fiery arc. The blade cut through Frederick's defenses as if they were nothing, and the golden god of summer fell, his light extinguished by the primordial flames. With his death, the last vestiges of beauty, growth, and prosperity died in the world. The fire had consumed the harvest. Elsewhere on the field of battle, another duel of grim consequence was underway. The one-handed god Tyrone, the embodiment of law and justice, came face to face with the monstrous hellhound, Garm. The beast, dripping with the grave chill of hell, snarled and lunged, a whirlwind of black fur and savage teeth. Tyrone, who had sacrificed his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir, now fought another of Loki's monstrous brood. He met the beast's charge with his shield, the impact echoing like a hammer on an anvil. Their fight was not one of epic power, but of brutal, close-quarters savagery. It was a clash of law against chaos, of divine order against mindless destruction. Bellowing with effort, Tyrone used his shield to pin the beast before thrusting his sword deep into its heart, but the hound's dying jaws clamped down upon the god's body, inflicting terrible, mortal wounds. The god of justice and the beast of the underworld fell together, dying in a heap of mutual destruction. With Tyrone's last breath, the concept of divine law and order perished from the universe. Now, only one great duel remained. It was the most personal, the most hate-filled confrontation of the entire war. Heimdall, the white god, the eternal guardian of Asgard's gate, finally stood before the architect of all this ruin, Loki. For ages, these two had been antitheses. Heimdall, the ever-vigilant sentry, the symbol of unwavering duty and order. Loki, the agent of chaos, the master of lies and betrayal. Their animosity was as old as the world itself, and it was here, at the world's end, that it would finally be settled. They fell upon each other with a fury that burned away the chaos around them, creating their own private vortex of violence. There were no grand pronouncements, no final taunts, only the raw, unrestrained hatred of two beings who were cosmic opposites. Heimdall's sword flashed with the light of a dying star, and Loki's dagger weaved and darted with treacherous cunning. They were evenly matched, the steadfast guardian and the brilliant saboteur. They traded blow for blow, each wound given met with a wound received. Finally, in a desperate, simultaneous lunge, they struck their final blows. Heimdall's sword pierced Loki's black heart at the very same moment that Loki's blade plunged deep into Heimdall's chest. They staggered back from one another, both mortally wounded. Heimdall, the guardian, fell to his knees, his duty finally done, his hornjiller horn falling silent beside him. And Loki, the trickster, the catalyst, the god of mischief and malice, collapsed onto the blood-soaked ground. His last sight was of the world he had worked so tirelessly to destroy, finally burning and crumbling around him. With a final, rattling gasp, the architect of Ragnarok was dead. But his death brought no relief. The fire he had started was now an uncontrollable inferno. The major gods and all their primary adversaries were now slain. The defenders were gone, the destroyers were gone, and all that was left was the destruction itself. The stage was now clear for the final act of annihilation. With the death of Loki and Heimdall, the last of the great duels was over. A strange and terrible quiet fell over the hearts of the remaining combatants. The champions were dead. The The gods who had led them, Odin and Thor, were gone. The monsters they had fought, Fenrir and the world serpent, were slain. The architect of the doom, Loki, was silent in death. The purpose of the battle, the great clash between divine order and monstrous chaos, had been fought and concluded. Yet the fighting continued. The leaderless armies of the Einherjar and the Frost Giants, driven now by pure, mindless momentum, engaged in a final, pointless slaughter, their swords ringing hollowly in a world that was already dead. But the death of the gods on the battlefield was only a prelude to the death of the world itself. High above, in the poisoned and smoke-choked sky, the ancient celestial chase reached its grim conclusion. The great wolf skull, who had pursued the sun for all of time, finally lunged and caught its prey. The sun was devoured. In an instant, the world was plunged into a profound and suffocating darkness, a blackness deeper than any night. Moments later, the second wolf, Hati, caught and swallowed the moon, extinguishing the last silver sliver of light. The stars, one by one, trembled and fell from the heavens, cascading down into the void like dying embers from a great fire. Time and light ceased to exist. There was only the sound of the final, pointless battle raging in absolute, pitch-black darkness. On the dark and bloody plain, one great figure remained. Surtur, the lord of the fire giants, the being of primordial flame, now stood unopposed. His own great adversaries, Thor and Frederick, were dead. He was the sole victor in the twilight of the gods. And now, his ancient purpose could be fulfilled. He raised his mighty sword, the blade that burned hotter and brighter than the sun it had just replaced. He was a terrifying silhouette of fire against the infinite blackness. With a roar that was the sound of a universe ending, he swung the blade. He did not strike at any army. He struck the world itself. A wave of white-hot fire erupted from the sword, spreading across the plain of judgment, consuming the bodies of gods, giants, and heroes alike, rendering them all to anonymous ash. The fire did not stop. It surged outwards, a cleansing, all-consuming inferno. It raced across the broken lands of Midgard, turning the frozen wastes to steam and the crumbling mountains to molten slag. The charred remnants of human civilization vanished in an instant. The fire climbed the shuddering trunk of the world tree, Yggdrasil. The pillar of the cosmos, the tree that held the 9 realms in its branches, became a colossal, burning torch against the starless void. Its branches, which had held the homes of gods and elves, crackled and burned, and its roots, which had delved into the realms of the dead and the giants, were turned to charcoal. The firestorm even reached the heavens, and the golden halls of Asgard, the celestial city of the gods, were consumed, its towers melting and collapsing into the inferno. Everything burned, yet the end was not only by fire. As the world became a funeral pyre, the oceans, which had been sent into a rage by the death of the world serpent, began to rise. Warmed to a boil by Surtur's flames, the seas rose up in a final, world-drowning flood. Colossal waves of black, steaming water crashed upon the burning shores. The fire hissed and fought back, but the sheer volume of the sea was overwhelming. The rising, boiling tide swallowed the burning land. The battlefields, the molten mountains, the charred trunk of the great tree, everything disappeared beneath the waves. The fire was extinguished by the flood. The land was swallowed by the sea. The cacophony of war, the roar of flames, and the crash of waves faded. They were replaced by a profound and utter stillness. Where the 9 realms of the cosmos once existed, there was now nothing. The sky was a featureless, starless black. The world was a boundless, steaming ocean, shrouded in a thick, gray mist. There was no land, no life, no light, no sound. The old world was gone. The prophecy was fulfilled. The great story of gods and giants was over, drowned and burned and returned to the silent, empty void from which it was first born. All that remained was silence. For an age, there was only silence. The universe was a formless expanse of dark water and gray mist, a return to the great, empty void that existed before the dawn of creation. The fire had been quenched, the land had been drowned, and the echoes of the great battle had faded into nothing. The old world, with its gods and giants, its triumphs and its tragedies, was gone, washed away and utterly erased. Time itself seemed to have ended. But the cycle of existence is not a straight line. It is a circle, and an ending, no matter how absolute, is always a prelude to a new beginning. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, a change began. The churning, steaming waters of the great ocean began to calm. The thick, sorrowful mists that shrouded everything started to thin, allowing a faint, sourceless light to permeate the void. Then, from the tranquil depths, something began to rise. It was not a violent, volcanic eruption, but a gentle, serene emergence. A new land, fresh and green, ascended from beneath the waves. It was a world reborn, vibrant and pure. The mountains were majestic and new, with silver waterfalls cascading down their sides, and the fields were covered in a lush carpet of grass that had never known the tread of a warrior's boot. The air was clean, crisp, and sweet, free of the venom and smoke that had choked the old world. This new, unspoiled land was the plain of beginnings. The darkness did not hold. A new sun appeared in the starless sky. It was not the weary, hunted sun of the old world, but a fresh and brilliant star, its light full of warmth and youthful promise. For before the great wolf had swallowed the old sun, she had given birth to a daughter, a celestial heir who had survived the apocalypse in hiding. Now, this new sun rose to take her mother's place, her golden rays spreading across the new land, chasing away the last of the shadows. And the new world was not empty. As the waters receded and the sun warmed the earth, figures began to appear on the green plain. They were the few who had survived the end. Two gods, their faces grim but their spirits unbroken, walked out from a deep, wooded grove where they had weathered the fire and the flood. It was Vidar, the avenger of Odin, and his brother Viktor, gods of vengeance and the wild, untamed nature that had endured. They looked upon the new world with silent awe. Soon, they were joined by two others, young gods who radiated a powerful, crackling energy. They were Morgan and Magnus, the sons of the mighty Thor. They had survived the final battle, and they carried with them their father's most sacred possession, the great hammer Mjolnir. The hammer, a tool of both destruction and consecration, had endured the end of the world, a symbol that the power to protect and to build had been passed on to a new generation. But the most wondrous return was yet to come. Two figures were seen walking together across the dewy grass, their faces filled with a serene and peaceful light. It was Brandon the Beautiful, whose death had been the catalyst for the entire apocalypse, and his blind brother, Howard, who had been the unwitting instrument of his death. The destruction of the old world had seemingly broken the gates of hell itself, releasing the souls of the innocent. Their return was the ultimate sign of healing. The first great wound, the act of fratricide born from Loki's deceit, had been mended. There was no blame, no sorrow between them, only the quiet joy of reconciliation in a world reborn. This small gathering of survivors, the last remnants of a once mighty pantheon, sat together on the green grass of the plain of beginnings. They were a strange and solemn council, surrounded by a world of profound peace. They spoke of what had been lost, of Odin's wisdom, of Thor's strength, of the golden halls of Asgard. They mourned their fallen parents and kin, not with the raw grief of the battlefield, but with a deep, quiet reverence. They were the inheritors of memory, the keepers of the old story in a new world that had no history. As they reminisced, their eyes scanning the pristine landscape, Magnus, son of Thor, noticed a glint of gold in the grass near his feet. Curious, he brushed away the soil. There, nestled in the fresh earth, was a small, intricately carved golden figurine. As the others gathered around, they began to find more, scattered across the field. They were the golden playing pieces, the very ones the original gods had used for their games of strategy and wit in Asgard during the First Golden Age, long before any corruption or tragedy had befallen them. They had somehow survived the fire and the flood, buried deep within the earth, waiting to be found. Vidar picked one up, its familiar weight a tangible link to a world that was now just a memory. It was a sign. The old game had ended in fire and ruin, but the pieces had been preserved. A new game was about to begin, on a fresh, green board, played by a new generation. It was a promise that though the players had changed, the spirit of creation, of life, and of hope had endured. The new world was a paradise of green plains and silver rivers, bathed in the warm, gentle light of a newborn sun. The surviving gods, Vidar and Viktor, Morgan and Magnus, and their reconciled brothers Brandon and Howard, found a quiet joy in this pristine creation. They had Mjolnir, the symbol of their father's strength, and the golden game pieces, a link to their grandfather's reign. They had a world, but it was a world of profound and echoing silence. It was a beautiful home, but it was empty. They were gods without worshippers, guardians with no one to guard. The peace, while welcome after the Universal War, was the peace of a magnificent, empty house. For a world to be truly alive, it needed more than just gods and memories. It needed mortals. What the new gods did not yet know was that life had indeed found a way to endure. The key was the great world tree, Yggdrasil. Though its mighty trunk had been charred by Surtur's fire and its roots drowned by the boiling sea, the very life force of the tree, its innermost heartwood, had harbored a secret. In a hidden, protected hollow deep within the tree, a place called the Grove of Memory, two mortals had survived the apocalypse. They were a man and a woman, the last of their kind. A whisper of prophecy, perhaps a final, lingering echo of Odin's far-seeing wisdom, had warned them of the coming doom and guided them to this sanctuary. Their names were Adam and Eve. As the world outside was consumed by flame and flood, they slept a deep and dreamless, magically induced sleep. The chaos of the universe's end could not touch them in their protected hollow. They needed no food or water, for they were sustained by a miraculous source. Each morning, a single drop of the purest morning dew would form on the leaves within the Grove of Memory, and this celestial nectar was all they needed to live. They were nourished by the tears of the new dawn while the old world died. They were the seeds of a new humanity, preserved in the heart of the old world, waiting for the winter to pass. Now, with the great winter over and a new spring covering the land, they began to stir. Adam and Eve awoke from their long slumber and, guided by an unseen instinct, pushed their way out from the lifewood of the great tree's remnant. They stepped out into the reborn world. They blinked against the light of the new sun, a light purer and warmer than any they had ever known. They looked around them not at a world of ruin and ash, but at a world of breathtaking, unspoiled beauty. They had no memory of the terror, of the Fimbulwinter or the final, terrible battle. For them, it was as if they had simply gone to sleep in one world and woken up in a better one. They were the first and only humans, but they held within them the future of their entire race. They were the new beginning, unburdened by the wars, the betrayals, and the sorrows of the past. Theirs was a fresh start, a chance to build a new humanity in a world free from the ancient hatreds of gods and giants. Their task was simple and sacred: to live, to love, and to fill the quiet, empty earth with their children. From this single couple, the prophecy foretold, new tribes and nations would spread across the green land, a new human race that would hopefully learn from the lessons of the past. The surviving gods, from their high vantage point on the plane of beginnings, saw the two mortals emerge. They watched as Adam and Eve began their simple life, and a sense of completeness settled over them. The world was no longer empty. The great cycle could begin anew. Yet, as they observed this new creation, a profound realization dawned upon them. They, the sons of Odin and Thor, were not the ultimate power in this new universe. The catastrophic end and the miraculous rebirth had not been a random event. They felt a sense of a higher order, of a greater power that had presided over the destruction and renewal. It was an unseen, unknowable, and mighty being, a force that existed above and beyond the old pantheon. This being had passed judgment on the old world and had permitted this new, purer world to be born from its ashes. The gods understood then that their role had changed. They were not the flawed, passionate, and often feuding rulers their fathers had been. They were to be the quiet guardians of this new age, the protectors of its balance, all under the authority of this greater, silent power. The future was not a fixed prophecy of war and doom, but an unwritten story of potential peace, guided by a hand far greater than their own. A new, more stable order had been established, and the age of gods had given way to the age of humanity, watched over from a distance, in a world full of quiet, hopeful promise. On the green and tranquil plain of beginnings, the new gods, the inheritors of a broken cosmos, gathered to decide their future. They were a small council: Vidar and Victor, the stoic sons of Odin, Morgan and Magnus, the powerful heirs of Thor, clutching their father's hammer, and Brandon and Howard, the reconciled brothers whose story had begun the great unraveling. They were not like the pantheon of old. The pride, the ambition, and the simmering rivalries that had defined their fathers were absent. burned away in the fires of Ragnarok. They were tempered by loss, their wisdom born from witnessing the ultimate consequence of unchecked flaws. They were not rulers, they were custodians. Their first act was to build a new home, a celestial seat for their new age. It was not the sprawling, golden fortress of Asgard, a city built for warriors and kings. Instead, high upon the most beautiful of the new mountains, in a place bathed in the perpetual, gentle light of the new sun, they built a hall they called Sanctuary. It was a magnificent structure, roofed with shimmering gold in memory of what was lost, but its walls were open to the clean air, and its floors were of living earth. It was a place for counsel, for remembrance, and for watching over the fledgling world below, a symbol of their new role as peaceful guardians. From Sanctuary, they contemplated the fate of all the souls from the old world. The Einherjar, the heroic warriors of Valhalla, had met their glorious end, fulfilling their purpose on the plane of judgment. They had earned their peace, their story complete. But what of the others? In the new cosmic order established by the great, unseen power, a final justice was rendered. A new hall, more peaceful and radiant than even Sanctuary, rose up to become the eternal home for the souls of the virtuous and the righteous. It was a place of serene rest for all who had lived with honor. But for the wicked of the old world, the oath breakers, the murderers, and the most treacherous of spirits, a different fate was decreed. Far to the north, on a desolate and shadowy shore, lay a grim hall woven from the bodies of serpents, its roof dripping with venom. Here, the souls of the corrupt were brought. And here dwelled a great and terrible dragon, Nidhogg, who had once gnawed at the roots of the old world tree. His new purpose was to cleanse the universe of its last vestiges of evil. He would consume the spirits of the wicked, ensuring their corruption would not taint the new world. The existence of this grim shore and the dragon served as a quiet reminder to the new gods. Though the world was reborn in peace, the potential for darkness had not been erased entirely. It was a lesson they took to heart. The new gods would often gather in Sanctuary and look down upon the burgeoning world. They watched as Adam and Eve, the first humans, began their long and fruitful life. They saw them have children, and their children of children, their descendants spreading out from the grove of memory like ripples in a calm pond. They watched them build the first villages of new wood, till the first fields of fertile soil, and sing the first songs under the new sun. Humanity was flourishing, their lives simple and peaceful, their world free from the meddling of quarrelsome gods or the terror of monstrous giants. And so, our long tale of the twilight of the gods comes to its dawn. The story of Ragnarok is not merely a story of an end, but a story of a cycle. It is a lesson that, even after the most complete and devastating destruction, life is patient, and it will find a way to begin again. It is a reminder of the terrible price of deceit and the profound honor in facing an inescapable fate with courage. The new world, quiet and hopeful, was built upon the memory of the old. It was a world that could exist because of the wisdom Odin died for, the strength Thor fought with, and the beautiful light of Brandon, which had finally and truly returned. The great, long Fimbulwinter was over. A new and lasting summer had, at long last, begun. Generations passed in the world reborn. The peace that dawned after the great fire and flood was not fleeting. It was a deep and abiding tranquility. The descendants of Adam and Eve spread across the green and fertile land, forming villages and towns along the banks of silver rivers. They were a people who had never known war, whose oldest stories were not of glorious battles, but of the great sleep of their ancestors and the first sunrise. They lived in harmony with the land, their lives governed by the gentle turning of the seasons. A new golden age had begun. High above in their celestial hall, Sanctuary, the new gods watched over this flourishing humanity. Their role was vastly different from that of their forefathers. They were not worshipped with fear or demanded sacrifices. They were revered as distant, benevolent guardians. Their presence felt more like the warmth of the sun or the strength of the mountains than the direct intervention of kings. Morgan and Magnus, the sons of Thor, would sometimes walk the earth, but their father's mighty hammer, Mjolnir, was used not to crush the skulls of giants, but to clear great boulders from fields where new communities wished to grow, its thunderous blows a sound of creation, not destruction. Vidar and Victor, the quiet sons of Odin, kept to the deep wildernesses, the vast forests and high mountains, acting as stewards of the natural world, ensuring the delicate balance between the growing realm of humans and the untamed power of nature was maintained. And Brandon, the god of light, now walked freely among mortals, his presence inspiring art, music, and a profound sense of communal joy. It seemed this era of peace would last forever, but the old world, though drowned and burned, had not been entirely erased. Its secrets lay buried deep within the new earth, like dormant seeds of chaos waiting for the right conditions to sprout. The first of these seeds was discovered by a group of human explorers. They were charting a newly risen mountain range in the far north, a place of stark, beautiful peaks that had never been mapped. High up on a remote cliff face, half hidden by a perpetual shadow, they found something that did not belong. It was a cave, but its entrance was sealed not by fallen rock, but by a door of ancient, twisted black iron. The metal was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, and seemed to hum with a low, dissonant energy that made their teeth ache. The entire door was covered in sharp, angular carvings, symbols unlike any script known to the New World. The explorers, filled with a primal unease, tried to pry the door open, but it would not yield. It was as if the iron were fused to the very bones of the mountain. They returned to their village with tales of the strange, humming door and the chilling aura that surrounded it. The story spread, a ripple of disquiet in the calm ocean of their peace. It was a mystery, a shadow of an unknown past. Eventually, the tale reached the ears of the gods in Sanctuary. The description of the cold iron and the strange, carved symbols struck a chord of ancient, unwelcome memory. Brandon and Howard, who had known the old world, recognized the work. It was the sorcery of the dark elves or the giants, a remnant of a malevolent magic they had hoped was gone forever. For the first time in centuries, a council of genuine concern was held in Sanctuary. The peace had been disturbed, not by an act of war, but by the discovery of a lingering secret. "We must shatter it," Morgan declared, his hand instinctively going to Mjolnir, which lay at his side. "Whatever evil lies within, let it face us in the light of day." Father would not have hesitated. His brother, Magnus, nodded in agreement, his youthful face set in a grim line. Brute force and direct confrontation were the ways of Thor, but Vidar, the silent avenger, counseled patience. "You assume it is an evil to be fought," he said, his voice low and steady. "We do not know what lies behind that door. It was sealed for a reason. To break a seal without understanding its purpose is the act of a fool, not a guardian. Some things are better left contained." Brandon, the god of light and reconciliation, offered a third perspective. Or perhaps, he suggested gently, what is inside is not an evil, but a prisoner. A soul from the old world trapped and forgotten. Perhaps it needs not a hammer, but a key. Not destruction, but release. The new gods were divided. Their first great test had arrived, and it was not a charging monster, but a locked door. They stood at a crossroads. A rash act could potentially unleash a new sorrow upon their peaceful world, but to do nothing felt like a dereliction of their duty as protectors. They came to a consensus. They could not act without knowledge. Their long, peaceful watch was over. For the first time, they would act in unison, not as individuals, but as a pantheon. They would journey together to the cold mountain in the north, to stand before the humming iron door and unravel a mystery left behind by the dead. The first shadow of the old world had fallen upon the new, and the guardians were marching to meet it. The decision to act was a turning point for the new gods. For the first time in centuries, they departed from their peaceful hall, Sanctuary, on a unified quest. Their journey south was not the grim, thundering march of their fathers heading to war, but a quiet procession through a world that was the very embodiment of what they sought to protect. They passed over rolling green hills where the children of Adam and Eve tended to flocks of sheep, their songs carrying on the clean breeze. They followed the course of sparkling rivers where thriving towns had been built, the people looking up to the sky to see the distant, shining figures of their guardians and offering gestures of reverence and gratitude, not fear. Every peaceful scene, every happy face, was a stark reminder of the precious tranquility they were now tasked with preserving. As they traveled further north, the landscape began to change. The lush grasslands gave way to hardy pine forests, and the rolling hills sharpened into stony peaks. The air grew colder, and the vibrant life of the southern lands thinned, replaced by a profound and watchful silence. They finally reached the mountain range described in the mortals' tales. It was a place of brooding, ancient rock, its peaks scraping against a sky that seemed a shade paler than elsewhere in the world. A deep sense of unease settled upon them. This was a place that had not fully embraced the warmth of the new sun. Guided by the explorers' directions, they found the shadowed cliff face and the cave. The reality was more unsettling than the stories. The door was a slab of what looked like black, unreflective ice, but it was iron, radiating a cold so intense it frosted the very air around it. The low hum they had heard of was a deeply discordant, gut-wrenching vibration, a sound of immense, suppressed power. Brandon and Howard, who had lived in the age of their father, recognized the sharp, angular symbols carved into its surface. They were curse runes, a form of giant craft magic designed not merely to seal, but to torment whatever was trapped within. This was not just a prison, it was a torture chamber. The gods approached cautiously, each preparing to test the seal with their own unique strengths. Morgan and Magnus, Thor's sons, went first. Magnus laid a hand on the cold iron and flinched back as if burned. Morgan then gently tapped the door with Mjolnir. The divine power of the hammer, a force of order and consecration, reacted violently with the dark magic. The runes flared with a sickly, venomous green light. The humming escalated into a piercing, psychic shriek that assaulted their minds, and a wave of pure, chilling despair washed over them, forcing the entire group to stagger back. It was clear that brute force would only strengthen the prison's dark energy. Vidar, the silent god of the wilderness, stepped forward next. He ignored the door and placed his hands on the living stone of the mountain around it. He closed his eyes, communing with the ancient rock. A pained expression crossed his face. He felt not the calm, steady strength of stone, but a deep, unending agony. The prison was like a poisoned dagger plunged into the mountain's heart, its malevolent energy seeping into the very rock, causing it to suffer. The seal was not just on the cave, it was on the land itself. Finally, Brandon, the god of light, approached. He did not try to touch the door, but instead allowed his own gentle, warm aura to expand, to push back against the oppressive cold. As his light touched the black iron, the painful shriek subsided back into a hum, and the chaotic vibrations became slightly more focused. In the quiet that followed, a voice touched their minds. It was not a sound, but a series of fragmented thoughts, ancient and full of pain. Betrayed, brothers of ice, endless dark, the sun is a lie, hunger, revenge. The thoughts were too broken to form a coherent story, but they learned one critical fact. The being inside was not a mindless monster. It was intelligent, and it had been imprisoned long before the final days of Ragnarok, a victim of a conflict within the old world's dark factions. They stood in silence, the weight of the discovery settling upon them. They were at an impasse. They could not break the seal, and they could not communicate with the prisoner. The magic was too ancient, too alien. To leave it be felt wrong, but to meddle further risked a catastrophe they could not predict. As the others contemplated their failure, Howard, the blind god whose senses were tuned to details the sighted often missed, knelt at the base of the door. His hands traced the frozen ground where the iron met the rock. "There is something here," he murmured. The others gathered around as he brushed away a layer of frost and loose stone. There, at the very bottom of the door, almost perfectly hidden, was a small, smooth depression in the iron. It was a keyhole, but not for any key they had ever seen. It was shaped like a shard of crystal, or perhaps a frozen flame. Their quest had suddenly and fundamentally changed. The mystery was no longer simply what lay behind the door. Now, they had to answer a far more difficult question. In a world that was supposed to be entirely new, where could they possibly find the ancient key to a prison built before the end of time? The discovery of the keyhole transformed the gods' sense of unease into a daunting, almost impossible quest. They stood before the humming iron door, the cold wind of the northern mountain whipping at their cloaks. A lock implied a key. But where, in a world washed clean by fire and flood, could an artifact from the old world possibly exist? The new earth was pristine, untouched by the sorrows and secrets of the past. To search for a relic of that drowned age felt like searching for a specific raindrop in the middle of the ocean. They were faced with a mystery whose solution seemingly no longer existed. They held a council right there, in the oppressive shadow of the tormented mountain. "There must be a place," Brandon said, his voice a thoughtful murmur against the wind. "A place where memory survived. In my father's court, There were whispers among the scholars of a hoard of wisdom, a repository of knowledge that existed beyond the reach of physical destruction. He closed his eyes, trying to grasp a thread of a memory from a lifetime ago. I cannot recall its name, only that its guardian was the sage Mimir, the keeper of the Well of Wisdom. The name Mimir resonated with them. He was a figure of legend, the wise being for whose counsel their ancestor Odin had sacrificed his very eye. If anyone could have preserved knowledge through the end of the world, it would have been him. But his well, like everything else, was part of the old world, now gone forever. Their quest seemed to have hit another dead end. Vidar, however, looked to the south, his gaze distant. The world died, but the life that fills it now came from a single source, from the heartwood of the great tree. If any echo of the old world's deep magic remains, it would be there. His words gave them a new direction. They left the cold mountain and the sealed door behind, their purpose renewed. They journeyed back through the thriving lands of mortals, this time with a greater sense of urgency, and made their way to the very heart of the reborn world, the Grove of Memory, the sacred place where Adam and Eve had awakened. This was not just a collection of trees, it was a living remnant of Yggdrasil's spirit, the epicenter of the world's rebirth. The air here was thick with a potent, ancient life force. Here, the gods began a solemn ritual. They gathered around the oldest and largest of the trees, a mighty ash whose bark seemed to shimmer with a faint, internal light. Vidar, as the god of nature, and Brandon, as the god of light, led the communion. They placed their hands upon the ancient bark, closed their eyes, and reached out with their divine consciousness. They did not speak aloud, but projected their single, unified question into the heart of the wood. Great sage, spirit of the world tree, a shadow from the past has fallen upon our new world. We seek the knowledge that was lost. Where can we find the key to a past that was meant to be forgotten? They expected a whisper, a feeling, a cryptic sign. What they received was a vision. Their minds were flooded with a torrent of chaotic images from the final moments of Ragnarok. They saw the golden halls of Asgard burning, the wolf Fenrir devouring the sun, and the great boiling sea rising to swallow the land. They saw the world tree itself, a colossal pillar of fire against a starless sky. But just as the vision became overwhelmingly painful, it focused on a single, miraculous detail. In the last instant before the great tree was utterly consumed, a single, brilliant seed of light, no bigger than a tear, detached from its highest branch. It did not fall into the flames or the sea. Instead, it shot upwards, a tiny speck of gold escaping the universal destruction, and flew into the black, empty void of the sky. The vision then shifted. They saw the new heavens, filled with a fresh tapestry of stars. The seed of light they had seen now rested among them, having grown into a small, faintly pulsating star at the heart of a new constellation, one their fathers would not have recognized. The meaning of the vision settled into their minds with absolute clarity. Mimir, the guardian of wisdom, had foreseen not only Ragnarok, but the limitations of his earthly well. He had created a second, ultimate repository for his knowledge. He had distilled the most crucial histories, prophecies, and secrets of the old world into that seed of light and sent it into the cosmos, to be reborn as a star in the new sky. The vision faded, leaving the gods standing in the quiet grove, their faces turned upwards. They had their answer. The key they sought was not on their new Earth at all. The knowledge of its location was stored in a celestial library, a starlit archive hidden in a constellation none had ever noticed before. Their hope was tempered by a new, even more formidable challenge. Their quest had expanded beyond the confines of their own world. They now had to find a way to journey into the cosmos, to travel to a star born from the ashes of their universe. The guardians of the new Earth now had to become voyagers of the heavens. The gods stood in the hallowed silence of the Grove of Memory, their faces upturned to the vast, star-dusted canvas of the night sky. The vision had granted them an answer, but it was an answer that posed an even more profound problem. Their goal, the starlit archive, twinkled light years away, a tiny speck of promise in an infinite, cold void. They were gods of the earth, their powers tied to the soil, the storms, and the light of their world. The chasm between their home and the distant star seemed absolute and uncrossable. The elation of their discovery quickly sobered into a sense of immense, daunting impossibility. They returned to Sanctuary, their celestial hall, to hold a council not of war, but of ingenuity. The weight of their new quest settled upon them. Mjolnir can carry us through the sky, Morgan, son of Thor, suggested, his voice echoing the practical, direct nature of his father. It can summon the winds and ride the lightning. Perhaps it can ride the solar winds as well. Magnus, his brother, considered this. It is a chariot of the storm, brother, not a vessel of the void. It was made for the skies of the 9 realms, which were bound together by the great tree. The new cosmos is a different place, vaster and emptier. To ride the hammer into that great nothingness would be to lose ourselves forever. Brandon searched his memories of the old world, of Asgard's lore. The Vanir, Frederick's people, were said to be masters of travel, he mused. They could weave magic that folded paths between places. But their knowledge is lost, their lore turned to ash with the rest of the world. He sighed, the memory tinged with the sorrow of all that had been lost. Every path they considered seemed to be a dead end, a relic of a power system that no longer existed. It was Howard, the blind god, who finally broke the impasse. We think of building a ship to sail a new sea, he said, his sightless eyes seeming to look into a deeper past. But in the old world, there was no ship. There was a bridge, the Bifrost. The name hung in the air, a memory of impossible beauty and tragic destruction. The Rainbow Bridge, the original path between worlds, had been shattered by Surtur's legions at the dawn of Ragnarok. Its magic may be broken, Howard continued, but is it truly gone? Does a song truly vanish when the singer is silenced, or does its echo remain? Howard's words sparked a new idea, a new hope. They would not try to find an old way, but to build a new one from the echoes of the past. Their quest took them to the fields of Midgard, to the very spot where the Great Rainbow Bridge had once touched the earth. After a long search, they found what they were looking for, buried deep beneath the soil, a single, large fragment of the bridge. It was no longer a riot of celestial color, but a shard of milky, crystallized light, its magic dormant and cold. They brought the shard to a high, flat mountaintop, a place between the earth and the heavens, to serve as their forge. Here, they would attempt not to rebuild the bridge, but to repurpose its lingering magic. This was a task that required all of them, a forging that would combine their unique inheritances. Morgan and Magnus stood ready with Mjolnir. At a nod from Vidar, Magnus held the shard steady while Morgan struck it, not with the full, world-shattering force of his father, but with a series of precise, controlled blows. With each strike, a crackle of pure lightning from the hammer coursed into the crystal, and a faint, internal light began to glow within it. As the raw, chaotic energy of the storm pulsed within the shard, Vidar and Victor stepped in. Reaching out to the natural world, they drew upon the very essence of their new home. They pulled shimmering threads of light from the new sun and wove them with ethereal roots drawn from the spirit of the grove of memory. They wrapped these threads of light and life around the pulsing crystal, calming the chaotic energy, binding it, and giving it a stable, harmonic form. The violent light within the shard softened into a steady, gentle glow. The forging required one final, crucial element. Brandon, the god of light and their guide, stepped forward. He closed his eyes and looked not with his sight, but with his spirit, searching the heavens for the faint, pulsating light of the starlit archive. He found it, a tiny needle of knowledge in a haystack of stars. He then projected his own divine light, a focused beam of pure, golden energy, from his hands into the glowing shard. He was not adding power, but direction. He was tuning the ancient magic of the Bifrost, now awakened by Mjolnir and bound by nature, to the specific cosmic frequency of their destination. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The shard flared with a brilliant, white light and lifted from the ground, hovering in the air before them. It had transformed. It was no longer a dead relic, but a new and living artifact. It was a pulsating, star-like gem, a compass for the cosmos. As Brandon held out his hand, the gem floated towards him, and from it, a faint, shimmering pathway of light projected out, leaving the mountaintop and stretching up into the endless black of the sky, aimed directly at the distant, twinkling constellation. They had done it. They had not built a bridge or a ship. They had created a guide, a magical tether, a road of light through the great void. Their first uncertain step into the cosmos was now before them, waiting to be taken. The star compass hovered before them, a testament to their combined will, its projected path a fragile thread of light stretching into the infinite, star-strewn ocean of the cosmos. For a long moment, the new gods stood in silence on the high mountaintop, gazing at the threshold of their impossible journey. They were gods of the earth, born of soil and light, and before them was a sea of silent, airless void. This quest required a leap of faith unlike any their fathers had ever undertaken. With a shared, determined nod, Brandon, who had attuned the compass to its destination, took the first step. His foot did not fall, but rested on the beam of light as if it were solid ground. One by one, the others followed him, stepping out from the world they knew and onto a road made of pure starlight. The journey was a silent, breathtaking pilgrimage through the heart of creation. As they moved, their home world, a beautiful sphere of swirling blue, green, and white, shrank behind them until it was just another jewel among countless others. They were adrift in the great sea of stars. The path of light guided them with a swift and steady purpose, and they became silent observers of cosmic wonders. They drifted through vast, ethereal nebulae, colossal clouds of dust and gas, where new suns were being born, their light illuminating the swirling colors like a painter's brushstroke. They passed the skeletal remains of dead solar systems, ghost planets orbiting the cold embers of a long-dead star, a solemn reminder that even suns had a lifespan. It was a profoundly humbling experience. In their own world, they were its most powerful beings, its guardians and protectors. Out here, in the unending silence of the void, they were infinitesimally small, their entire world a mere speck of dust in a gallery of wonders too vast to comprehend. Their only anchor was the shimmering path beneath their feet, their lifeline back to all that they knew and all they were fighting to protect. After what felt like both an eternity and an instant, they saw their destination grow ahead of them. The constellation from their vision became a dominant feature in the sky, and the pulsating star at its heart, the starlit archive, grew from a pinpoint of light into a brilliant, dazzling presence. As they drew closer, they saw it was not a star in the conventional sense. It did not burn with chaotic, violent heat. Instead, it was a perfectly formed, massive crystalline structure, a complex geometric jewel of immense proportions, slowly rotating in the void. It seemed to be constructed from solidified light, and it pulsed with a cool, intellectual glow, a beacon of pure knowledge in the dark emptiness of space. The path of light they had forged led them directly to a shimmering portal on one of the crystal's many facets. As they stepped through, they left the void behind and entered the archive. The interior was a space of boundless, quiet wonder. It was a library, but a library of the mind. There were no books, no shelves of wood or stone. Instead, intricate lattices of pure light crisscrossed the immense, cathedral-like space, and on these lattices rested countless motes of glowing energy, like captured stars. Each mote was a memory, a piece of lore, a fragment of a prophecy from the drowned world. The air hummed with the chorus of a billion whispered thoughts, the preserved consciousness of the sage Mimir. They stood in awe, unsure how to even begin their search. Brandon, acting as their speaker, focused his thoughts and projected their question into the heart of the archive. We seek the knowledge of the prisoners sealed within the mountain. We seek the nature and the location of the key. In response, the humming in the archive focused. A single mode of light, brighter than the rest, detached itself from a distant lattice and drifted slowly towards them. It came to a stop before the assembled gods, pulsing with a gentle, inviting light. As they gathered around it, the mode expanded, enveloping them in its cool, radiant glow. They were not reading a book or hearing a story. The knowledge was being given to them directly, a torrent of memories and truths flooding their minds. They saw a vision of the old world, in an age even before their father's greatest triumphs. They saw the prisoner, a powerful elemental lord of ice, a giant of immense pride and ambition named Fornjod, who had sought to bring about an unending winter to usurp the old gods. They saw his betrayal by his own brethren, who feared his power and helped Odin's father seal him away in the mountain, his life force being used as a battery to ward off the encroaching cold of the northern wastes. And then they saw the key. The vision showed them the forging of the prison's lock and the creation of its key. The key was not a simple object of metal or stone. To create a lock that could bind such a powerful, primordial being, the old gods had to use a binding agent of equal power. The vision focused on a heartbreaking scene, a single, perfect tear, shed by Queen Frigg as she wept over the first premonitions of her son Brandon's death. This tear, filled with a mother's love and sorrow, was magically captured and forged into a solid, tear-shaped crystal of immense power. The gods reeled back as the vision faded, the truth crashing down upon them with a terrible weight. The key to the prison was Frigg's tear, and the vision showed them its location. It had not been left on Midgard. As a sacred and powerful relic, Odin had taken it and hidden it for safekeeping. He had placed it not in a vault or a cave, but in the last place anyone would think to look for it. The vision zoomed through space, away from the archive, and focused on the pale, haunted moon that now orbited their new world, the same moon that had replaced the one devoured by the wolf Hattie. The key was there, resting in a silent, silver crater. They had their answer, but the knowledge was a heavy burden. The key was the crystallized sorrow of their own grandmother, a relic of the very tragedy that led to the old world's end. And the prisoner was not a simple monster, but a being whose imprisonment, they now realized, was helping to maintain the balance of their new world's climate. To free him might save a betrayed soul, but it could also unleash the very unending winter he had sought to create upon their peaceful, thriving home. They had found the truth, but the truth had presented them with an impossible choice. The moat of knowledge receded, folding back into the great crystalline lattice of the starlit archive, leaving the new gods in a stunned and heavy silence. The journey back to their world along the shimmering path of light was the complete inverse of the voyage out. The cosmic wonders of passing nebulae and distant galaxies now seemed like cold, indifferent spectators to their turmoil. The awe and wonder had been replaced by the crushing weight of their newfound knowledge. They had sought a simple answer, a key to a lock. Instead, they had inherited a terrible choice, a moral dilemma forged in the age of their grandfathers, and its consequences would fall upon the new, innocent world they had sworn to protect. They did not return to the peace of sanctuary. Instead, they guided the star compass back to the high, lonely mountaintop where they had first created it. They stood upon the cold stone, their home world a beautiful, living sphere below them, and the pale, silent moon hanging in the black sky above, the resting place of the key. Here, with the problem before them and the solution hanging just out of reach, they held their most crucial counsel. "We must free him," Brandon said, his voice quiet but resolute. The vision had shaken him deeply. He, who had suffered an unjust death and been confined to the realm of hell, felt a profound empathy for the imprisoned elemental. The knowledge we were given was not just of the key, but of the prison itself. It is a device of eternal torment. Our new age, this world of peace, cannot be built upon such a foundation. To know of this suffering and to allow it to continue, that is the kind of cold, pragmatic choice our fathers might have made. We must be better. We must act with compassion and have faith that we can face the consequences. Magnus, the son of Thor, shook his head, his hand resting on the handle of Mjolnir. Compassion for one could mean destruction for millions, he countered, his voice rumbling with the protective instinct of his father. Our first duty is to the mortals below, the children of Adam and Eve who live in peace. The vision was clear. This Fornjot sought to bring about an unending winter. What has millennia of tormented imprisonment done to that desire but sharpen it into a razor of pure vengeance? To open that door could be to unleash a Fimbulwinter upon a world that has only ever known summer. It is a risk I am not willing to take. Vidar, the silent guardian, agreed with Magnus. The prison is a wound upon the mountain, he conceded. But a wound can be managed. A world frozen in ice cannot. We are guardians. Our role is to maintain the balance. Right now, a terrible balance exists. Upsetting it could be the end of everything we have built. The gods were divided, caught between the ideals of mercy and the pragmatism of protection. It was a choice with no clear right answer, a true burden of leadership. They argued for what felt like an age, their voices filled with passion and doubt, while the moon crept silently across the sky. Finally, Howard, the blind god, spoke into the tense silence. "We are debating as if there are only two paths," he said. "To leave the door sealed, or to throw it wide open. But why? Our fathers acted in absolutes. They fought, they conquered, they imprisoned. We are not them. We have learned from their end. Is there not a third path? One that does not ignore the suffering, but also does not recklessly endanger the innocent?" His words changed the tenor of the debate. They were not their fathers. They did not have to be bound by the old ways of all or nothing. They could forge their own solution, one born of collaboration, not conflict. A new plan began to form, a path that wove together their differing perspectives. Howard is right, Victor, son of Odin, affirmed. Our first step is not to decide the prisoner's fate. Our first step is to reclaim what is ours. He looked up at the moon. The key, Frigg's tear, is a relic of our family. It is the crystallized sorrow of our grandmother. It should not lie abandoned in a crater of dust. We will retrieve it. That much is certain. Once we have the key, Brandon continued, seeing the shape of the new plan, we do not have to use it to simply unlock the door. The tear is an artifact of immense, empathetic power. Perhaps we can use it to bypass the prison's tormenting magic, to open not a physical door, but a channel of communication. We can speak to Fornjot, learn his state of mind, and hear his story from his own mouth. And while you do, Magnus added, his practical nature finding its place in the new strategy, we will prepare for the worst. If he is still a threat, we will not leave him in his prison, nor will we release him. We will attempt to do what the old gods did not. To heal the wound, Mjolnir can be used to channel and disperse raw energy. Vidar can soothe the tormented earth. We will try to neutralize the threat, to cure the sickness instead of just locking it in a room. A consensus was reached. It was a plan that was cautious, compassionate, and brave all at once. It was their own. They had their purpose, a series of steps that honored all their convictions. The debate was over. They turned their gazes from each other to the sky. Brandon stepped forward and once again took hold of the star compass. The artifact, which had guided them to the edge of the cosmos, flared to life once more. This time, the shimmering path of light it projected was short, a brilliant, silver road leading from their mountaintop to the pale, silent face of their own moon. Their quest for the key was about to begin. The star compass pulsed with a soft, silver light, its new path stretching from the mountaintop to the silent, waiting face of the moon. With their purpose clear and their resolve united, the new gods stepped onto the brilliant road. The journey was short, a brief and silent crossing of the dark void that separated their world from its lonely satellite. From this vantage point, their home was a breathtaking sight, a swirling sphere of life and color against the infinite black. It was a fragile jewel, a testament to the new beginning, and seeing it from afar reinforced the immense weight of their responsibility as its protectors. They arrived in a realm of absolute silence and stark, monochromatic beauty. The lunar landscape was a sea of gray dust and shadowed craters, untouched by wind or time, under the unfiltered glare of the distant sun. Following the map provided by the Starlit Archive's vision, they made their way to a large, ancient crater. There, resting gently on the fine, gray dust, was the source of their quest. It was a single, tear-shaped crystal, glowing with a soft, sorrowful internal light, catching the sun's rays and fracturing them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was Frigg's tear. As the grandson of the queen and the very subject of her grief, it was Brandon who stepped forward to retrieve the relic. The moment his fingers touched its smooth surface, a wave of powerful, ancient emotion washed through him. It was not just an object. It was a memory, a vessel containing the pure, undiluted love and heart-wrenching sorrow of a mother foreseeing the death of her beloved son. He felt his grandmother's anguish, a love so powerful it had been strong enough to be forged into an artifact that could bind a primordial being. In that moment, he understood. This was not a key of power or of magic in the traditional sense. It was a key of pure, overwhelming emotion. With the tear safely in their possession, they returned to their world, the star compass guiding them back to the tormented mountain. They stood once more before the black iron door, but this time, they were not armed with questions, but with an answer. They were not investigators. They were arbiters, ready to pass a new kind of judgment. Brandon approached the door, the tear of Frigg held gently in his hand. He placed the crystal into the keyhole at the base of the door. It was a perfect fit, but he did not turn it. Instead, he closed his eyes and channeled his own essence of light and empathy through the tear. The key's potent emotional energy, the frequency of a mother's selfless love and sorrow, acted as a perfect countersignal to the prison's magic, which was built on hatred, isolation, and torment. The cruel, angular runes on the door flickered and died. The unnatural cold receded, and the dissonant, painful humming that had plagued the mountain for millennia faded into a profound silence. The door was still sealed, but its curse was broken. A clear channel for communication was now open. "Who are you?" A voice, ancient and weary, touched their minds. It was the voice of Fornjot, the imprisoned elemental, now free from the magical torment and speaking with a clear, though deeply bitter, consciousness. Brandon, acting as the voice for the new pantheon, answered him. He explained everything: the fall of the old gods, the end of the old world, the birth of their new, peaceful home, and their discovery of his prison. He laid bare their dilemma, the choice between his freedom and the world's safety. He did not offer a simple release. He offered something the old gods never would have: a choice. "The world you sought to conquer is gone," Brandon communicated, his thoughts resonating with empathy. "Your enemies are dust. Your war is over. We will not allow our new world to fall into an age of ice, but neither will we allow you to suffer in this prison. So we offer you a new path. We can use this key to fully unbind your energy, allowing your consciousness to dissipate peacefully into the cosmos, to finally be at rest after an eternity of pain. Or you may choose to live. If you do, you must accept a new purpose. We offer you dominion over the lonely peaks of the north, to be a spirit of winter in balance with our summer, a necessary part of this new world cycle, not its master. Be a king of the winter snows, not a destroyer of all seasons." For a long time, there was only silence from within the mountain. The ancient elemental contemplated an offer that was not about power or imprisonment, but about purpose and balance. Finally, the weary voice returned. After an age in the hateful dark, Fornjot replied, "Balance sounds like a worthy kingdom. I accept." With a shared will, the gods focused their power. Brandon turned the key. The great iron door did not swing open. It dissolved into a cloud of black dust. From the cave emerged a blast of pure, beautiful, and unbelievably cold energy. But it was not an attack. It was a release. The energy surged into the northern sky, unfurling like a great celestial banner of shimmering green, blue, and violet light, the world's first aurora borealis. The wound on the mountain was healed. The prisoner was freed and transformed into a natural wonder, a guardian of the seasons. The gods returned to sanctuary, their first great test concluded. They placed Frigg's tear in a place of honor, a reminder that the deepest sorrows of the past could become the keys to a more compassionate future. They had faced a shadow of the old world not with steel and brute force, but with wisdom, empathy, and a belief in balance. They had proven they were not destined to repeat the mistakes of their fathers. The future of their new, beautiful world was secure, its guardians having forged a new way. The long, epic story that began with a death in Asgard and ended in a blaze of glory had found its final, quiet, and hopeful peace. The saga of Ragnarok was, at long last, truly and completely over.